Hey everybody, it is the second video I'm doing this week based on topic requests. I got totally stumped this week, and so I put up on Twitter, what should I talk about? And people had really good ideas, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should talk about that. And really? You still want me to talk about that? So yesterday, the Kingdom Come video was, oh yeah, I forgot. I should talk about that. When I first heard about the controversy, I admit I thought it was going to peter out because it was so damn dumb. But it didn't, and so I talked about it, and it led to really good discussion, which I always feel like I've done my job with a video when the comments are high quality, when people are sharing things that are actually, really, really good, like really rich and cool and all that stuff, and that definitely happened yesterday. So I know this is kind of a Feedback Friday thing, but it was just so good yesterday. I felt like remarking on it. And maybe I'm stalling a bit because I can't believe I have to talk about this again. Multiple people asked me to talk about the fact that some members of the media still continue to insist that video games are in any way linked to mass shootings and school shootings, things like this. And, the short version, if you don't have a lot of time, no, they aren't linked. Over and over and over again, we see no link. Small studies, big studies, all studies, we see no link. You can stop watching now. But if you want to know more, you know me, deep dives on these things because it's easy to just go, no, they don't, mic drop. First, I believe I fixed yes, it is still fixed. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com, Leanna K. This video is going to get challenged. I can almost guarantee you it's going to get demonetized. But I fixed the slate. When I did the live Feedback Friday last week, a patron pointed out I had missed it's a monthly patron, or monthly. There was no H in the patron. I knew it looked weird and I couldn't figure out why. There's no spell check in Photoshop. So it was like, oh my God, thank you. I'll fix that. And it took like a 5-minute fix. I've been using that for a while, so thanks to that patron for pointing that out. That was pretty funny. The stuff, getting back to the serious stuff, there's a lot about this topic of video games, and in Jack Thompson's day, it was operant conditioning. In Anita Sarkeesian's day, it's cultivated behaviors. They keep trying to prove links. They find small-ish biased studies that will tell them what they want. But this is the thing about science. You can't take one study. You have to see whether it's replicated. And the bulk of evidence, the established evidence that we can see right now, I'm covered in Momo fur. Look at how long that is. Holy crap, that's a Momo fur. But the preponderance of evidence, the accepted understanding is that no, video games don't cultivate behaviors. Certain behaviors shown in video games appeal to the people who are already predisposed to that sort of behavior. So if there's somebody who really likes, if all they're playing is games that involve, mass casualty scenarios, grounds for concern, but the game's not causing that, and you shouldn't restrict access to those games. You should use the games as a launching off point for a discussion to possibly get a troubled young person the help they need. Now, this factors in, when you're talking about gun violence, you're talking about a lot of things, and school shootings get a lot of headlines, but school shootings are actually the tiny, tiny, tiny minority of the issues involving gun violence. And that's the thing that tends to get missed when we talk about solutions. I'm not an advocate of gun control because of these mass shootings, because I've seen the evidence. I'm convinced that more gun control doesn't stop these types of mass casualty events. The people who want to do these things, these are planned, coordinated attacks, and there's no deterrent because most of them are intending to take their own life or don't care if they get killed. They just want to take out as many people as possible before they do that. My advocacy of gun controls, of stronger gun laws, even here in Canada, but more in the US, is suicides. That's the big thing for me. And a lot of those are handguns. So banning AR-15s does nothing. Hello, Momo, you gonna come up? Banning AR-15s does nothing with suicide. Momo's here, right, Momo? You hear said topic? You want to give hugs? There's Momo. There he is. But most suicide deaths are by handguns, and suicides by guns. And men are much more likely to use a gun than women. Therefore, men, when they attempt suicide, they are more likely to die by suicide, because if it's a drug overdose or something like that, people can be rushed to the hospital, medical attention, you can save the person. But a gun is pretty immediate and final, and so that intersection of mental health and guns is something that's really important to me, and something that needs to be talked about, and something that doesn't get talked about because it gets eclipsed by these big news stories. A suicide isn't the national news. Good job, Loki. Loki just barked at Momo. A suicide is not the national issue that a school shooting is. And that's sad, because the thing about suicides is a form of death that's 100% preventable if you know what to look for and you know the intervention. And I think that we are doing a disservice to young men for not having the discussion about what's leading, and older men. Sorry, I don't mean to misspeak. What I was thinking about there was the fact that most mass shooters tend to be young men, and young men also die by suicide using handguns. But the biggest risk group is men over 50, spreading into 40 now. Ageism's a real thing. And so it's something we do need to talk about. I have a dear friend who's alive today because somebody removed the firing pin from his sidearm because she knew he was in distress. And if she hadn't done that, he wouldn't be around today to be my friend. This happened before I met him. So I'm very thankful that there was someone in that situation who did know what to do, was a little bit sneaky about it, but, smart move. But it's things like that. We are social creatures as human beings, says the massive introvert, me. But we do need supportive people. Our entire structure is designed to work with each other, and we do need people supporting us to move forward in our lives. And a lot of people turn to video games because they don't have that. And so there's probably a significant correlation between people who have video games and things like depression and despair and all that stuff. But video games don't cause it. Video games are just something somebody does to alleviate the symptoms, albeit temporarily. I personally used video games to contextualize my own decisions. I felt it was part of an actual healing process. But not everybody has that. They don't have the framework to use games in that way. I think they could, but everybody's so damn afraid of games that they're not being used in that way. Now, when I say despair versus depression, that's another thing to remember about a suicide attempt or dying by suicide. It's a person might be depressed, they might not be, but that's not what suicidal ideations are about. They're about crisis. They're about despair. It is not just depression when you're talking about that. It is somebody feeling like the world would be better off if they weren't in it. That or various variations on that theme. It's different. And this is important to realize, because unless you understand the dynamics in these things, then we can't prevent them, right? School shootings are different. School shootings, based on the best evidence I can find, it's all really murky. There's a lot of factors that go into these things, but we know that unlike other types of gun violence, which are more demographically spread out, linked to poverty, poor living conditions, stuff like that, gang violence, etc. School shootings are connected to this concept of aggrieved entitlement, that someone has lost some sort of real or perceived status in the world, and they feel like it is their obligation, as some kind of insert reason here, to get that status back by any means necessary. Staying alive is not important in the minds of this person than it reclaiming whatever it is that's lost. In a lot of cases, it has something to do with being unmanned in some way. It's a very different relationship between masculinity and that sort of thing than it is femininity. Masculinity is lost in a very different process than femininity, and it's a valued thing in our society, like it or not. And I do think more work needs to be done to expand the boundaries of masculinity, what it means to be a real man. I think these discussions have to be had. It's unfortunate that all of this work connected to gender is being so polluted by outrage warriors. That's why I call them outrage warriors, as opposed to connecting it to social justice or what have you, because it is people who just want to scream. They're very angry, very hurt people who just want to scream instead of just finding solutions. And feminism is infected with it. The so-called men's rights movement, and I say so-called because I would prefer to call it men's awareness movement, men's support movement, because the lexicon of rights is a losing battle. It's you have to convince people that men are lacking rights, and that, good luck to you. When you start talking about supports, I think a lot of people can recognize, yeah, a lot of men don't have the support that they need to feel valued. And that's a huge part of it. You know, a lot of guys, they chafe against feminism because they're like, nobody gives a damn about me. And I've had to accept that nobody gives a damn about me, and that's what this world is. Why should I care about the rights of anybody else when my life is shit? Like, I hear that over and over and over and over and over again. And there's a correlation between people feeling like there's no hope and I've heard young people in high school right now, be referred to as the mass shooting generation. That, like, you know, in the 60s during the Cold War, kids did nuclear duck and cover drills in school. They were the nuclear generation. With my generation, it was things like, well, we were the AIDS generation, quite frankly. We got the AIDS awareness, condom use, and everything like that. I mean, the idea that there was a condom jar in the guidance counselor's office. That's what my high school experience was like, alongside fire drills and that sort of thing. But yeah, you could go in, and it was controversial among religious conservatives in my school. That was predominantly Muslims and Asian families. I say that just because people think religious conservative, they think white people. That wasn't the case where I grew up. But there was a certain understanding that there were bigger issues, and they didn't have to agree that they wanted their kid doing that sort of thing. But they were fine for it for other kids. You know, they thought their kid wasn't troubled, so they'd never be going to the guidance counselor. Delusion aside. But they were okay with it being there because it wasn't in the classroom, even though it was still in the school. And these are the sorts of compromises that effective advocacy achieves. You have to bring that perspective in. And that's what I'm not seeing with the mass shooter generation, with the school shooting generation. The idea that the powers that be are blaming everything that isn't gonna solve the problem and not taking the steps that actually will solve the problem. And now the onus is on me to say what will solve the problem. Well, fortunately, we know what works. And I know this because I grew up in a high crime neighborhood where diversion was a big thing. Diversion works. The problem is I saw it starting to erode while I was still in high school. And I graduated in something like 1995, something like that. I can't, it's lost to the mists of time. I think there was a 95 on my graduation cap. I am not good with, I can remember historical dates like battles and things like that, but my own life, I don't remember when things happen. But we saw the erosion of the social programs that were put in place in schools and communities during the 1960s and 70s because they were trying to cut down on violence. They were trying to cut down on child abduction, things like that. It was basically places where kids could go in school and after school to build a sense of themselves. And it was not academic coursework. It was not something they were graded on. It was skills development in a different paradigm. And because university admissions have become so competitive and budgets have been slashed, we lost those self-esteem building programs that benefited kids, even in my generation. Millennials don't have those things because everybody's treating it like it's somebody else's problem. It's parental responsibility. It's community responsibility. No, it's school responsibility. You guys get money per kid. We don't. The schools, we don't have the money. We'll do fundraising. Well, that's coming from the same parents that are sending the kids to the school. It's just to pass the buck. And the reality is that the money has to come from somewhere. But then the problem is, even if you have the programs, you have to encourage the kids to take it. And that becomes its own challenge, because I know I started dropping extracurriculars like crazy when I was preparing for university. And it would have been better for me as a person to have been able to continue the stuff I enjoyed, not just the stuff I was graded on. But I talk to a lot of educators, full-time educators, because I lecture, and they say kids won't do anything unless there's a grade on it. And I completely understand why. The millennials get a really bad reputation. They get, it's very negative. Oh, those millennials, they're lazy, they're this, they don't appreciate things. When you look at things from the point of view of a millennial who is being raised in a hyper-competitive environment, that going to not just university, not just any post-secondary, but the right schools, which a minority of people actually get accepted to because the rejection rate is so high. They're taught that that's the only way you're going to have a decent life. Otherwise, you are going to struggle because those middle-class jobs are evaporating. So you either make over 80 grand a year or you're making minimum wage. There's less and less in between because manufacturing's being eroded. Good paying support jobs, service industry jobs are being eroded. So you can either go into a trade and then you have to fight people to constantly get paid, or you have to go to a big, Ivy League school because, game development companies only hire from a certain number of schools. Never mind. There's, schools in the California area, up here, Sheridan College, and that's pretty much it. But only so many people can go to Sheridan College, right? They do take people from other schools, but that's the big Sheridan College up here had the foresight to make a video game design program. And so people go there. But your best chance is to go to schools in the US because of the pipeline, because so many studios are based in that, up the coast of the US. North Carolina's a tech development thing. They have a few studios, but it's concentrated in that kind of Bay Area and up and down the coast, up into Washington State, and then into Vancouver, that you're best going to a West Coast American school. And if you don't, you're going to have to work a heck of a lot harder if you even can't have a chance at all. And so kids are stressed and kids feel hopeless because I know I looked at my future and went, I don't have because in Toronto, a lot of people don't know this, the really top spots, there are private schools in Toronto. So a lot of the elite schools, so like Queens McGill, Simon Fraser, U of T, less and less, but U of T. The people from UCC, Bishop Strawn, those private schools with very rich parents, they get first pick. And so you can get accepted to those schools with a B average from, you can go to the school of your choice with a B average from those schools when everyone else needs like insane grades because they know your parents will pay for it. You're not doing it on a student loan. You're likely to donate back to the school. These elite schools cultivate rich alumni. So if you don't go to private school in high school, you are already at a disadvantage. My husband insists we should say advantages instead of privilege. So I will test that and just say advantages for this. But then it's, where do you go to school? Is it a good neighborhood? Is it considered a not good neighborhood? Well, applications from certain neighborhoods are seen as better than others. And a lot of these school shootings that make mass school shootings that make the headlines do so because they happen in these neighborhoods that are supposed to be good, safe, white neighborhoods. But you have to understand what goes on in the heads of kids who go to these things. You're somebody who is not necessarily going to, make anything of yourself, amount to anything. And you're being told by everywhere that you have no excuse not to. Something snaps in some people's heads because there's no mentorship. There's no path. There's one right way to do these things, which is go to school, work yourself to exhaustion, get the best grades you possibly can, go to university, rack up massive amounts of debt, and end up in middle management because, let's face it, it's all the children of rich people that are getting the CEO jobs. Startup and entrepreneurial culture are a completely different thing. I wish I knew more about it. I know why I didn't know more about it, because the truth is a lot of entrepreneurs are high school and college dropouts. They don't want to encourage people to do that, but I am definitely one of those entrepreneurial brains. I figured that out much later than I would have had I had proper mentorship. It's what you're comfortable with. And, perhaps working a trade is something people would really enjoy. Now, the problem with working a trade is if you get hurt, you're kind of messed up, because if you can't work, you don't get paid, so on and so forth. I have members of my family that had that happen too. It's awful. But, there aren't alternative paths for people who have different skills. Now, this kid in Florida, and yeah, he was of legal age to buy a gun. I just found out, well, yesterday, by the time you watch this, that you can buy a gun at a younger age before you buy a handgun. And the reasons kind of make sense, because AR-15s are recognized as a rifle, and rifles are used for hunting, and you can't conceal them as well. So that's why the laws are apparently the way they are. Thanks, Twitter Focus Group, for informing me of this. Interesting. It's the question of, well, if he couldn't have bought an AR-15 until he was 21, this 19-year-old who committed the shooting, allegedly, he did it, would it have stopped? Would it have prevented this shooting, or would it have just delayed it? Perhaps it wouldn't have happened at a school. It would have happened at a place of work. This is the question. Are these sorts of age-related controls just delay tactics? Possibly not. The brain is still in the adolescent phase. The problem is you'd have to not make guns legal until the age of about 25 to 28. And that's a non-starter politically. The science is the science. We're in the age of a prolonged adolescence. They know the way the brain develops. It just is as it is. So the only thing left is programs and diversions and mentoring and watching young adults to make sure in that critical transition between adolescent and adult that they don't get so embittered by the world, because there's a lot of people say angry young men. I think they're actually terrified. I think they're actually scared, and that's not acceptable to say. So these young men find a way to get angry instead because it feels more powerful and it's more socially acceptable by society than a young man admitting he's afraid. And I think if we brought back the after school programs, if we brought back the mentoring, if we actually made the understanding that we do need to fund youth workers and social workers. And I mean, I have a friend, he works through a church, and so he gets paid by the church. But I'm like, if you're not Christian, you can't really access his services. He does great work. I wish there were secular programs that anyone could go to, because not all churches and mosques and synagogues have youth workers who are as great as my friend is. He's an amazing youth worker, and they're lucky to have him. He's impacted positively the lives of dozens of kids. By the time he finishes his career, it will be hundreds of kids that he has mentored. Now, he has challenges reaching girls because it's a church. Apparently you can't be alone with a person of the opposite sex at all because of insurance in any youth worker. But we need those youth workers. Is he college educated social worker? No, he's a pastor. And we need to get more creative getting people into these jobs that they actually do have the skills. They may not have the fancy pantsy expensive piece of paper to prove it, but they have the skills. We need professional mentors that can get in and can talk to these kids. If somebody is passionate about video games, and a lot of young men are, find someone they can talk to who understands gaming. It may not be another man, it may be. Some young men are more interested in speaking to somebody who's more of an auntie figure than somebody who's a father figure. It will depend on the kid. And we need mentorship of young people just as people to become more important. This idea that a degree and a grade will teach you how to human. It doesn't. It makes you a specialist in a particular field of knowledge, but it doesn't grant you any wisdom. Some of that is just time, but some of that is feeling like there's a person in your corner who will understand you and who will not reject you when you fail, who will be there to cheer on your successes as well. Successes have to matter. Failures have to matter a lot less. And I'm saying this because this isn't just about identifying potential school shooters. It's identifying any kid who is struggling, whether it's some sort of neuroatypicality or social awkwardness or whatever the challenges, mental health challenges, whatever. Therapy doesn't, standard talk therapy doesn't work for everybody. Not one size fits all for anybody. You need people to get in there and figure out what is going to work for these kids and allow them to access the pipelines that connect to this. And that's what I have seen. It is no accident, I believe, that the erosion of those secondary or assistive services to the educational process have eroded, even in good neighborhoods, because in good neighborhoods, the school considers that parental responsibility, parental rights. The schools don't want to step on things like freedom of religion and things like that, so they don't offer the programs. It's expected that the parent knows what's best for their kids. There's a lot of parents who don't. There's a lot of parents who don't even understand their kids. So it's difficult. I mean, with AIDS, we could do stuff because there was no right to bear dick. We have to work around this right to bear arms. It's enshrined in the Constitution, and it might be a good thing because just because you take away someone's gun and stop them from killing a bunch of people, it doesn't mean they're not still deeply unhappy. So that's my thought about the whole thing. I'm sure it'll be controversial in some way, but I came to this idea that it's a process of elimination based on what I've seen doesn't work and what I saw work, and which programs eroded as the school shootings increased and which ones didn't. That's how I came to these conclusions. You notice I said nothing about taking away guns at any point. That's not part of my solution. It's making young people right through their 20s feel like they matter. Because right now, the world doesn't.